You're listening to Sustainably Geeky, the podcast for everyday environmentalists.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Sustainably Geeky, episode 27. This is a bonus episode. We're going to be talking about the formation of a new national park. And last episode, we talked with Dallas, who has joined us again, about the National Parks Conservation Association. And they gave us a really great overview on public lands in general, why they're important, how they came about. And so today we're actually going to talk about the formation of a new park within the system. So I am joined by, like I said, Dallas of the National Parks Conservation Association, and also Daniel Hernandez with Frontera Public Relations. And we're going to talk about the Blackwell School in Marfa, Texas. So this is a historic site that was primarily open to serve Hispanic students in that community. Unfortunately, this was during the time of segregation, so this school was, made just for that group. It was funded in 1909, and it was open all the way until 1965 when the schools were integrated, and it stayed vacant until 2006 when the Blackwell School Alliance formed to preserve the building. So I'm going to let Daniel kind of talk more about the school itself, and I guess why you guys decided to try to make this part of the National Park Service.
Yeah, absolutely. Jennifer, thanks so much for having us on the podcast. Really appreciate it. The Blackwell School in Marfa really for a very long time has been a fixture of the community, both in terms of, I think, what it stands for the Mexican American and Latino community in Marfa. And at the same time, I think now that we are talking, especially in the current kind of state of political and race relations in America, really stands to become an integral part of telling the story of segregation and of oppression, and how we can learn from that and move forward from that in a way that's going to be positive for our communities. So as you mentioned, in the early and mid 1900s, the Blackwell School was not officially segregated school through the law, but through de facto segregation was a school where Mexican American students were required to attend school for elementary school in Marfa. That did, of course, come to an end when school segregation was realized in Marfa in 1965. But for many, many years, that school for many, many school children was their place of learning. And it was for them a place that a lot of them have actually fond memories of. And of course, there are some memories that are maybe not so fond, just given the circumstances of the times. In terms of why the project is wanting to move forward, in 2006, the Blackwell School Alliance was formed kind of as a way to rejuvenate the organization and help kind of bring to light the story and the issues that a lot of the students faced, and many of whom are still living today. But as you know, they are getting older, and I have been working now with the executive director of the Blackwell School Alliance, Gretel Enck, and she has been wonderfully instrumental in pushing forward the narrative and the idea of being able to preserve the Blackwell School, because it is a really unique fixture of history in Marfa, and I think could really serve a great purpose, not only for the local community, but as a learning tool and a place to kind of elevate these voices for our state and for our nation. So the process has slowly moved forward. It has become a Texas historical site, and has also been placed on the National Register of Historic Places. And so it just kind of seemed fitting that the next step in the process was going to be to make it a National Historic Site. And I and Gretel, as well as everybody else at the Blackwell School Alliance, are really happy to be working with Dallas and the folks over at NPCA to hopefully bring that dream through to fruition.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up, that it is very timely, this discussion, I think. Unfortunately, our country has a long history of segregation and just outright, racism. And while I know the school was very impactful and important to the folks that went there, it was founded, based on these beliefs. And I was reading, there's a great Texas Monthly article about the school, and they said that the students couldn't even speak Spanish. They had to speak English, so that was kind of stripped away from them. And then there were just a lot of, like you said, stories about the, just things that they did to the students or made them do that weren't very, ethical or nice, to say the least. So it is important that we remember those things and honor them, and hopefully keep future generations from repeating them. And I have to say, I have been to Marfa 3 times, and I'm embarrassed to say that I didn't know about the Blackwell School. I love Marfa, I love West Texas, so the next time I go, I'm definitely gonna look that up and try to swing by, because it is open to the public, correct?
Yeah, so generally on weekends, Gretel tries to have it staffed for at least a few hours, both on Saturday and on Sunday, and it just is a really wonderful place to go and learn about the history of de facto segregation in the state of Texas, and how those children who were, a lot of times very impoverished and very underserved, but at the same time still deserve to get an education as was required by the Constitution of the state of Texas. I actually spoke with a former student today. Gretel had sent out a newsletter earlier this week that she shared with me, and asked for folks that had stories that they would like to share about the Blackwell School to call me. And this woman called me, and the first call, she called me and she took a few moments to give me her name and tell me that she was a former Blackwell student. And then she broke down in tears, and I felt really bad because I thought, oh no, maybe she's upset that we're doing this, or thought we had stirred up some emotions. And so she said, give me a few minutes, let me regain my composure and call you back. And then she called me back, and she talked to me about how grateful she was that this project was taking place, because for her, the Blackwell School really holds such a special place in her heart, not only as a place where she received an education, but a place that really served as a foundation for the education for Hispanic and Latin American school children in Marfa. And so for us to be moving forward with this project in that kind of respect, I think it's just so important. And as you say, maybe it could use a little bit more elevating in terms of being able to bring people to it. And I think that's exactly what this project is aiming to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's a very powerful story, and I know that you probably hear a lot of stories like that. So I think it's awesome that you guys are giving people a voice in a way to kind of share their experiences, especially as like you said, they're getting older, and we want to make sure that we honor those stories and keep them for future generations. So so Dallas, tell us about how NPCA got involved in this project, how it kind of came on your radar.
Absolutely. Well, we are fortunate that the majority of West Texas, really a quarter of the state, is in the congressional district of Mr. Will Hurd, who has half of the 16 national park sites of Texas in his district.
Wow.
And we have been great friends with their office and their colleagues on the ground. And so really showing him what parks mean to the local communities and how they benefit the local communities in real tangible dollars, as well as the stories and the commemorative aspects and the restorative aspects that we might so often think of. And so he actually met Gretel, head of the Blackwell School Alliance, at a coffee shop. She took the opportunity to educate her congressman about a wonderful treasure of Marfa that is lesser known. And so he connected us and said, if we really want to get this site protected, want to elevate it from state level protections to federal, then that course would be through the natural park system. And as we know, we've got our big NPs, our big national parks like Big Bend and Guadalupe Mountains, but there are 419 national park sites in our country, and 2/3 are cultural and historical. And as you move through a process, you have to be a Texas historic landmark first, and then you would complete a variety of resource studies, gathering documentation, working with the State Historical Commission so that you can be placed on the National Register for Historic Places. And so once you're kind of in that federal system, then the Park Service would ideally get direction from Congress to conduct a special resource study, which talks to the suitability, feasibility, and sustainability of that site coming into the Department of Interior's system. And then from there, usually it takes a couple of years if you're lucky for that special resource study. And of course, there's an entire appropriations process that we get to go through every year, and we're doing so right now. And then it could be added to the system as whether it's a historic site, historical park, national seashore, or even using the Antiquities Act to become a national monument. But one thing I just find so poignant is this is a cultural landscape park. So that's looking at, yes, the structure, but it's also the stories and how the people who use the site correlated to the city and the systems around it. So everything from the rail line to the city block system, to the food, to the heritage, to the gatherings. It's not just a building. It's everything that happened in and around that roof line and in and around that schoolyard. And, we're talking about how poignant the story is in today's national conversation. And at National Parks Conservation Association, just this week, we had a conversation on Confederate monuments and what those mean in the terms of the Park Service. We have so many battlefields, including here in Texas, that are part of the system. And where does interpretation versus maybe honoring the wrongs of our past, where is that line? Because as you say, if we don't acknowledge our history, we're doomed to repeat it. And y'all know I'm a history political geek. And last night I was watching, I've started The West Wing over for the 13th time. And
as one does in quarantine.
Exactly. And we're in the first season, and they're interviewing a gentleman who's going to be the government's director of civil rights. And they've called him in because some of his words they feel might feel offensive to people of a different line of thought. And he said, do you have a dollar bill in your pocket? Take it out and turn it over. So Josh Lyman turns it over, and he said, see the pyramid? It's broken. It hasn't been filled in yet because America is still growing. We still have work to do. And I thought that is so perfect because parts of our past, we have the opportunity to look back and use today's lens, which is good so that we don't repeat mistakes. But we also have to take time to reflect on what the society and the norms and the changes were with each generation, which, as Daniel spoke about, there's alumni at the site who it was an honor for their family to have a formal education setting and set aside by their workers. So it was essentially, a worker's benefit. And they have gotten shoes or clothing that were hand-me-downs, just as my children get hand-me-downs. And then you go through the 50s and 60s and start seeing civil change with President Kennedy and President Johnson. And so then you will see the memories of those alumni, that their representation of how they experienced the school, was the norm of what we were experiencing across the country. And so if you look at, we have our history, but we also have this great opportunity, and a lot of it through technology, that we can be sharing messages with each other. That's how we fill in that space in the pyramid, and knowing it will never be filled in because we always will be learning and growing. And to me, that's the perfect spot for national parks to serve a role, and I'm getting goosebumps, of the American people, because we are always learning and growing, and there's always going to be so many critical stories to keep uncovering, and that we will keep uncovering hopefully hundreds of years from now.
Yeah, what a great point. If we were to run out of stories or stop growing, then that's when we need to be worried, I think. I'm really glad that you brought up the number of cultural sites in the national park system, because I think that's a lot of times people don't even think about that, right? They just think national parks, literally a park or a lake, right, or, a lot of trails or the Grand Canyon or whatever. But you said 2/3 of the system are actually cultural sites. Yes. Which is pretty amazing because, like you said, there's just so many stories to tell. And we were talking with Alan on the last show about how many more are out there and how, it's just never ending. It's great job security.
Right.
Sure. And I'm also glad you brought up Will Hurd, because I know he was featured in the documentary The River and the Wall, and he was, I could tell just from the, the brief part that he was in that he was a big supporter of the national parks and nature in general. So it seems like you got a really good ally there, and he was able to kind of help start the process and get everything connected.
Yeah, no, he's really been a great champion. And as you know, there's also Air Force bases in his district that are also co-located both in San Antonio and Del Rio, where we have national park sites in Texas. And so helping us also showcase the respite qualities and the family reconnecting opportunities that national parks can afford to veterans. I mean, there's just our rich culture of West Texas has so much to offer. And I hope folks will, when it's safe, venture out and really explore the hidden treasures and not just the most popular treasures of Big Bend. But, in Marfa, we know Marfa Lights, we know Marfa Prada, but the Blackwell School, the amount of regalia that Daniel and Gretel have amassed and curated, those stories are incredible and you won't see them anywhere else.
See, selfishly, I want to say, don't put Marfa on the map. It's a hidden gem. I don't want anyone to go there because I love going, and that's the charm of it, right? It's like a small town, big town kind of thing. But I do want people to experience all the great things Marfa has to offer, and the Blackwell School, of course. So, yeah, I guess we talked about, the school and the process. So, Daniel, how did your organization get involved in, what are you all doing to move the process forward?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am actually a native Marfan, and I currently live in El Paso. For my full-time job, I work for State Senator Jose Rodriguez and handle legislative and media relations for him. But I feel like I kind of have a knack for getting people connected and just trying to kind of collaborate and brainstorm about different ideas and things that come up in the community. And so I started a really small consulting firm. I've done a couple of political campaigns and some just kind of contract work here and there. But then Greta reached out one day, I guess I think after she had visited with the NPCA folks a little bit, and said, "Hey, I have this really great project that we're working on." And she said, "I think you would be great just because of your ties to Marfa and the knowledge you have of the Blackwell School and the community and the ties." And so for me, it just seemed like such a perfect fit to be able to give back to the community that gave so much to me growing up, and at the same time be able to, hopefully see a project through to fruition that is going to really elevate the story of Marfa and kind of like Dallas said, not just the Prada Marfa and the art and a lot of the things that Marfa has come to be known for, but at the same time, a lot of the struggles that a lot of the families that Marfa, whose backs the town was built on as well. I think it's just so important that we are able to memorialize and honor that legacy that I think continues to move forward today. And so through my work with Frontera Public Relations, I've had a great opportunity to work with folks at the NPCA like Dallas and Kyle and some other folks, and at the same time work with Gretel at the Blackwell School in really trying to figure out ways that we are going to be able to message this project and get community input and talk to former students and other community stakeholders that we have. Because I think really the biggest thing that is going to drive this project forward and make it be successful is by hearing from the folks who have direct connections to that school. I personally have older family members who attended the Blackwell School. I volunteered there a really long time ago when the Blackwell School Alliance had just kind of started actually, and one of the tasks that I had was helping organize photos. And I picked up a photo once and I thought, this really looks a lot like my Aunt Teresa. And I looked at the photo and it was actually my grandmother, Azucena Fuentes, who had attended the school back in the 50s. And so for me, it was really a poignant moment for me to come, and this was probably 10 plus years ago, but for me to come to that realization, that there was family history for me personally at this site, as well as for so many others who live in the community and beyond. I think about the woman that called me earlier today, and she lives in El Paso, and she actually lives really close to where I live. And so when she heard that I lived in El Paso, she was elated, and she said, "Oh my gosh, you're from Marfa and you live in El Paso too." And there was this kind of like instant connection because we had that common ground of knowing about Blackwell, and she attended, and I had family members who attended, and we spent a couple of minutes on the phone. She asked me about who my family members were and who my family was, and and just kind of my upbringing in Marfa. And I think the more that we're able to make those real connections between, folks who are like in my generation, for example, and the older folks who have had those experiences and the stories that they have from the folks who are even older than them, I really think being able to come at this project from that angle is going to be the best way to kind of move forward from that. So I'm really excited for our organization to be involved. And I'm so happy to be working with the likes of the NPCA and Gretel over at the Blackwell School. It's been a pleasure so far. Our plans have been a little bit derailed. We had a community charrette that we were working on, and then coronavirus happened. And so we've kind of had to change our game plan a little bit, but we're working on putting together some video projects and some other tangible items that I think are really going to help move the project forward. And, again, really hope to see this through to the end.
That is so cool that this is your hometown and you're helping to do something that will have a national impact. And it's personal for you. Your family went there and people, that have gone there. So that's a really neat twist to it. And I love that you guys call yourself Marfans too.
Yes. Our moniker, yes.
That's awesome. Were you going to say something else?
No, I'm good.
So on that note, let's say, someone in another community has a really neat cultural site or just a historic story that they think is important that needs to be told. What do they need to do? How do they get the process started, I guess, if they want, if they think this is a really good candidate for a state park, or a national park, or a historic site, or something like that?
Usually your city or your county might have a state historical or preservation office. And so it's good to really bring together a community steering committee. One, you want to make sure that your view isn't the only view that's included. It's really important that there is the community want so that you can have your local decision makers that are backing you, because you're going to want to get letters of support. And that if this were to move through to a historic site, obviously it would take it off the tax rolls at some point. So you really want to do it from a groundswell. So gather folks in the community, gather decision makers, and then work with the Texas Historical Commission to see what kind of documentation they can help you gather, what their requirements are. They've got big checklists, great staff. And one thing you can always do is go to the Texas Historical Commission website, look up other sites, see what's on there, try to find the category, what fits, look at their application. It's almost like doing a book report or doing a research paper to see what's required and see if you have a building that is still reflecting the true materials. We have some instances, and you can see them like at the San Antonio Missions, where in the 80s, they came in to fix some of the masonry. Well, the way they fixed it were with materials of the 80s.
Yeah.
Well, they were approved at the time, but they weren't historically accurate. And so then in removing those 20 years later, you do some damage, because they're applying concrete to plaster al fresco scenes. So there's a lot of cost that goes into that recovery. Or if you look at Blackwell, there was a third room added to the 2-room school building over time, but it was done in a way that it didn't damage the original structure. So it was still maintaining integrity, and the site was not in a state of disrepair or, loaded with toxic chemicals where you couldn't allow people. So, there's kind of an inventory of your community and an inventory of your site or your collection of materials to really deem it's not worthiness of the history, but worthiness of it needing to be maintained by a government entity.
Now, is that process the same outside of Texas? Since we may have listeners listening in other states, do you know if they have to go to their state's historical commission or?
I believe they do in order to get on the National Register. It might have a state preservation office title or something slightly tweaked, but there's going to be a similar entity that they need to, start. It's just starting at the local level and working your way up. And honestly, when you do that, then you are creating, and it'll be, it could be 10, 20, 30-year process like it was for the World Heritage designation in San Antonio, but you are creating more and more advocates who are more and more connected with the site, invested with it personally. And it's that kind of passion and advocacy that lawmakers need to see to know it is worth their attention and their funding.
Yeah, because if you go to Congress and say you should make this a national park, mm-hmm. and the people living near it don't even support it, they're going to be like, well, why would anyone else come see it?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's and in having that community support, specific to Blackwell, this would only be the second Latino site in the national park system.
Oh, wow.
The Cesar Chavez National Monument in California speaks directly to the grape workers strike, but not to a broader cultural story. And there was a Latino theme study put forth by the National Park Service speaking to this void, a very predominant cultural aspect of our country, especially, in our southern states, in our western states. So having that community support, then someone can see themselves and see their story in the national park. And you're going to attract more people who then feel parks are accessible to them. Right. And it's going to draw those people out. And those people one day are going to be lawmakers and decision makers. So it's really a cycle that all comes from the community and from the people.
Yeah. Daniel, what has the response been from the community outside of, the prior students of the school, just the general community? You said you guys have started engaging them. So what has that response been?
Yeah, we've had an opportunity to work with a lot of community stakeholders, and that's everybody ranging from former students all the way up through the city council and the county judge's office and commissioner's court in Presidio County. And they have all been so wonderfully supportive of this project and really see the value in elevating the story of the Blackwell School and see, kind of like Dallas talked about, what it's going to do on a dollar basis for the community that already kind of thrives on this tourism economy, but at the same time also see the historical significance and just juxtaposed with, again, the current kind of race relations and kind of the civil rights movements we're continuing to see in America. It just seems like it's the right time for this project to come through. I think, there are probably folks that have different views about the Blackwell School. I know there are former students there who maybe would prefer for it not to be a National Historic Site or a historic park, just because I think a lot of the memories that some folks have there are very traumatic and they're very difficult. And, sometimes, people, I think, deal with their trauma in different ways. And one of those ways is just to kind of, out of sight, out of mind in a lot of ways. But I think even those folks, really see the value of the story that is there to be told from the Blackwell School, and not only the physical structure, but as Dallas mentioned earlier, some of the items that have been curated throughout the last, couple of decades. We're talking about band uniforms from the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, and cheerleading uniforms, and photos from basketball teams and yearbooks, and the list just goes on and on and on. There is a paddle, as they used to paddle a lot back then, and they have one of the principal's old paddles as well. There's so much history to be told, and I think aside from the fact that at one time race relations were really difficult in terms of the school and what it meant for the community, but I think now, kind of looking at it through today's lens and being able to look back on it and use this facility and the story that is within it to learn about our history, not repeat it, and at the same time be able to perpetuate and honor those stories is just so important.
Yeah, and I'm glad to hear that even the folks who didn't directly go to the school or who weren't, really associated with it are still supportive, and they see the value in that. And you mentioned a couple of times, the economic impact that these parks can have, and I think that's an important argument when you're making, a case for having any big tourist, attraction in a community. Unfortunately, sometimes that's the thing that, lawmakers and leaders want to hear about, not, oh, well, it's the right thing to do or whatever. So do you, is it, I guess, standard practice to do some kind of economic impact analysis or, a formal study kind of showing that when you're trying to start a park like this?
I would say for a smaller site, it's not. Obviously, when we did you pursued the UN designation for the San Antonio missions, that required a really in-depth study because it covered so many aspects for why it had universal value. But we do know at National Parks Conservation Association that for every dollar of federal budget that is appropriated to a site, you see $4 return to a local economy. And when you want to talk about garnering more champions, whatever someone's entry point is into national parks or public lands, let's help them find that entry point so that they are a champion. And when you look at the Hotel and Motel Association, Chambers of Commerce, Convention and Visitors Bureaus, if you want them on board, and frankly, they can make the systems easier for you and they can make it more robust so your site is really a great anchor tenant, driving people to town and visit it more often and for more reasons. So, and again, the timing, good and bad, having the coronavirus, we've got restaurants and hotels that at best have seen a 76% downshift in their economy. If they were even able to stay open, if they had to shutter a second time, we don't know that they will. But if you have folks who, when they can safely get back out, I don't think any of us are going to be jumping on an airplane anytime soon, but we might get in our car, and as Texans and as folks in a lot of other states, we might drive somewhere. Where can we drive in a day? Where can we drive, one overnight? And you can find small towns like Marfa. And
well, that's more like half a day, but in Texas,
in Texas, I mean, we're halfway to, in El Paso, we're halfway to LA from where you and I are.
Yeah.
So it's relative, right? But if we can find something that can be the driver to help turn around these small businesses of these visitor shops, convenience stores, restaurants, hotels, if we can use our public lands to get people safely reintegrated into the economy, I mean, I think that's a great champions on both sides of the aisle.
Yeah, and I can attest from working at a Chamber of Commerce that the best way to get through to organizations like that is definitely show the economics of it, show how this will help the local economy and the local citizens and things like that. And in a town like Marfa, where it's very, heavily reliant on the tourists that come through, I can see this, being a big argument for that. So, okay, so what else can you tell us, I guess, about the site or, the process in general that we haven't discussed already? Is there anything we missed or?